There is a piece of wisdom forged in the humbling fires of history that is fundamental to understanding the limits of power. It goes something like this. The most dangerous opponent is not the one who is stronger than you. It is the one who refuses to recognize that you are even in a fight. This is not a celebration of the underdog. It is a clinical observation about the nature of systems. It suggests that a perfectly designed plan, backed by overwhelming force, can be rendered completely impotent when it collides with a reality that is too chaotic, too decentralized, and too indifferent to even notice its grand strategy. I want to take you to Western Australia in 1932. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression. Australian farmers, many of them veterans of the First World War, were struggling to survive, and they were facing an invasion, not by a foreign army, but by a force of nature, a vast migrating army of an estimated 20,000 emus. The emus, driven by drought, had discovered that the cultivated farmland was a paradise. They were trampling crops and destroying fences, threatening the nation's food supply. The farmers, themselves former soldiers, appealed to the government for help, and the government responded with the only tool it understood, the military. The Minister of Defense approved a formal military operation. A detachment of the Royal Australian Artillery, under the command of a Major G.P.W. Meredith, was dispatched. They were armed not with rifles, but with 2 Lewis machine guns, the same devastating weapons that had defined the battlefields of World War I, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The plan was simple. The objective was clear. This was not a negotiation, it was an extermination. It was a finite, winnable conflict. On one side, you have trained soldiers, military discipline, and the pinnacle of modern weaponry. On the other, you have large, flightless birds. The press was invited to witness the glorious victory. The Great Emu War had begun. On the first day of battle, the soldiers located a flock of about 50 emus. They set up their machine gun and opened fire. The birds, instead of panicking in a predictable way, did something infuriatingly brilliant. They didn't retreat as a single herd. They instantly scattered in all directions, running with incredible speed in a chaotic, unpredictable pattern. The machine gunner, trying to track these feathered insurgents, fired hundreds of rounds and killed, perhaps, a dozen birds. The Army's strategy was based on the assumption that the enemy would behave like an army. But the emus were not an army. They were a decentralized, leaderless network. There was no general to kill, no command structure to disrupt. Every single EMU was its own independent agent, acting on the simple, powerful instinct of survival. The military tried to adapt. A few days later, they mounted one of the Lewis guns on the back of a truck, creating a crude, mobile armored vehicle. They chased a flock of 1,000 emus across the rough terrain. The plan was to mow them down, but the truck could not keep up with the birds. The ride was so bumpy that the gunner couldn't get a clear shot. The entire comical and terrifying chase resulted in 0 casualties for the emus. After a week of this humiliation, Major Meredith and his men had used thousands of rounds of ammunition to kill a few hundred birds at best. In his official report, he noted with a kind of grudging professional respect that the emus seemed almost bulletproof and possessed a devilish cunning. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, he wrote, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. The operation was a catastrophic failure. The military retreated in disgrace. The emus had, for all intents and purposes, won. This story is not a joke. It is a profound lesson in the arrogance of a certain kind of power. The army failed not because it lacked strength, but because its very definition of strength was useless. Their power was in centralized command, in focused firepower, in a predictable enemy. The emus's power was in chaos, in decentralization, in an utter indifference to the human concept of a battle. It forces us to look at the wars we wage in our own lives and work. The perfectly structured corporate plan that shatters upon contact with the chaotic market. The rigid, top-down solution to a complex social problem. The brute force effort we apply to our own habits, only to see them scatter and reform. The most important question we can ask when facing an overwhelming problem is not, how can we apply more force? It is, are we even in the same fight? Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is not the machine gun. It is the creature that doesn't even know it's supposed to be afraid of it.